Welcome to the lesson on dividing by decimals. Today's objective is that you will be able to divide decimals by other decimals. Think about if we wanted to figure out how many quarters fit into $2. We need to use some division to figure this out. We'd have to divide 2 by the amount of money a quarter is, which is 25 cents. Which means we would need to use some decimal division. And you may be able to count how many quarters are in $2, but we should be able to see this with a long division problem. We'll return to this at the end. Here's a quick flashback. When we're dividing a decimal by any number, we have to remember where the decimal goes in the quotient, the answer. And you should remember that we always put the decimal straight up above the dividend on top of the house. So the decimal here goes straight up, and it's going to be right here in our answer. 3 5/10 divided by 7 is 0 5/10. Here's something else that you should remember. When we multiply by 10 or any other power of 10, we can just move the decimal. So for example, 1 5/10 times 10, like I have here, if I did that out the long way, I'd get 0 times 5 is 0, 0 times 1 is 0, can't forget my swagger. Then 1 times 5 is 5, 1 times 1 is 1, and add those up, and then I remember that I have one decimal place here, which means I need one decimal place here, 15. But the quicker way to get that is to say, look, I want to multiply by 10, which means I'm going to move this decimal one place to the right. So I get 15. And the same thing works for other powers of 10. Like if I did 1.5 times 100, that's just going to be, well, I want to move this decimal 2 places to the right, which means I'm not going to have 15. 2 places means I have 150. And if I did 1.5 times 1,000, I have to move the decimal 3 places. So it's going to go 1, 2, 3, which means I have 1,500. Let's think about these two division problems. 12 divided by 6, well that's easy, that's just a division fact. 12 divided by 6 is 2. But what about 120 divided by 60? Well, 60 doesn't go into 1, it doesn't go into 12, it does go into 120, and when I count 60s, 60, 120, I see, oh, it goes in 2 times. These two division facts are obviously related, and I can see it a little more clearly if I write them as fractions. So I'm going to write 12 divided by 6 as a fraction. That's 12 over 6. And 120 divided by 60 as a fraction is 120 over 60. And you should notice that this fraction is the same thing. We've just got some zeros on the end. In fact, if I want to get from one fraction to the other, I can multiply by 10 over 10, which is our friendly 1 in disguise. And that's going to give me 6 times 10 is 60. 12 times 10 is 120. So one way of solving 120 divided by 60 is to say, you know what? I know that that's the same thing if I take away these zeros as 12 divided by 6, and so I know that's 2. Here's another one, 1,200 divided by 600. Well, I'm going to have a hard time doing that division. I don't know how to count by 600s. So instead I'm going to write that as a fraction, 1,200 over 600. And now I realize that if I divide the top and the bottom by 100, That's going to change this into 12 over 6, which is just 12 divided by 6. That's equal to 2. So 12 divided by 6 was 2. 120 divided by 60 is 2. I see a pattern. What about 1.2 divided by 0.6? 1 2/10 divided by 0.6. But I'm getting kind of messed up here because I have a 0.6. I've got a decimal. I don't know how to divide by decimals. Let's see. Let's use fractions to figure it out. 1.2 divided by 0.6, that's the same thing as 1.2 over 0.6. And this is going to be a lot easier for me to divide if I can change this so that instead of a decimal down here and probably up here, I've got a whole number. So I remember that if I multiply by 10, and if I do it to the bottom, I got to do it to the top. When I multiply by 10, that's just going to move the decimal one place over. So 0.6 times 10, that's just 6, because again the decimal moves one place over. And 1.2 times 10, that's just 12, because the decimal moves one place over. And that's equal to 2. Swell. What about this problem? 0 and 12 hundredths divided by 6 hundredths. Shouldn't that also be 2? Well, let's see. 0.12 over 0.06. And again, I want to multiply by something so that I can get rid of those decimals. And I see that if I multiply by 100, that's going to take care of the decimals on the bottom, and if I do it to the bottom, I've got to do it to the top. And so again, 0.06 times 100 means I move the decimal 2 places. So that's going to be just 6. The decimal's now right there. And 0.12 times 100 is going to also move the decimal 2 places, which is 12. And hey, that's 2. Here's what that looks like when I use the division house. Again, this is the same problem. 0 and 12 hundredths, 0.12, divided by 0 and 6 hundredths. And I got to think the same way. I have a trouble if I've got this decimal outside of the house, if I'm dividing by a decimal. So I need to get rid of it. And remember, this division problem is just like the fraction we saw in the last slide. So I can multiply by 100, or move the decimal 2 places, which means it's going to be right there. And if I do that to the bottom of the fraction, or the outside of the house, I have to do it inside as well. So I'm going to move it 2 places, which means the decimal is right here. Which means the decimal is right here, and again, it's right here. So the division problem that I'm actually doing is 12 divided by 6. That's the same thing. Let's do one more before we return to the money problem. This is 12 divided by 6/10. Now I have to be very careful. I see this decimal outside of the house, and that's a problem for me. I've got to get rid of it, which I know I can do by multiplying by 10, so the decimal moves to be right there. And now I have to do the same thing inside the house, but I don't see a decimal, which, every whole number always has a decimal to the right. So my decimal is right there, and when I multiply by 10, I'm going to move it over 1 place, and there's going to be a 0 that's going to fill the space. So this problem is actually 120 divided by 6. And when I do this out, 6 goes into 12 2 times. I subtract and I get 0, bring down the 0 there, and 6 goes into 0 times. And the answer to our original problem is still the same thing. It's 20. And remember that decimal is going to go straight up, so that's 20. It's the same thing. So let's return to this problem. how many quarters fit into $2? Well, that's the division problem. 2 whole dollars divided by 25 cents, 0.25, because that's how much a quarter's worth. And to do this division, I have to get rid of these decimals outside of the house, which means I'm going to have to multiply by, for 2 spaces, I have to multiply by 100, which means the decimal is going to go there. And if I did it outside the house, I also have to do it inside, which means I have to remember that 2 has a decimal right here. And I'm going to move it 1, 2 spaces, the same number of spaces inside, which means I fill those empty places with zeros, and the decimal is going to be right here. I'm actually going to be doing the division problem 200 divided by 25. That's the same division problem. And to do this, I'm just going to count my quarters, count 25 cents. 25, 50, 75, 100, 125, 150, 175, and 200. And that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the answer is 8. And to check this, let's just change our $2 into quarters. So I've got $2. Remember that each dollar has 4 quarters. So there's 4 for that dollar. And here's 4 for this dollar. And look, this is telling me that 2 divided by 0.25 is equal to 8. Hooray!